Morning, students. So this week I have you actually kind of working with something that's a little more complicated than I have normally asked you to do on your own. And so you're going to listen to this, hopefully, and then read an article and then respond in a written paragraph that we're going to discuss when you come into class, either Thursday or Monday. So without any further, let's go ahead and get this thing started then. And throw that up there and go ahead and take out my camera. All right, so what we're going to deal with today is this thing called Malthusian theory and Boserup theory, as well as some policies that governments do to control population growth. And so today what you're really looking for is Malthusian theory and people that are critical of it. And Boserup theory is actually going to be a criticism of Malthusians. And so, as we go through this, first we have is the idea of this fellow who's going to be an English economist. His name is Thomas Malthus. Malthus is going to believe that the problems that the world would really face was that the population would, without a doubt, outstrip the ability to produce food. And so people would stop reproducing once they started starving to death. Now, when that happens, the idea is the crude death rate and the crude birth rate obviously will not be a problem anymore, so much as people will not be able to be fed. And because of that, the crude birth rates will drop because there will be less people available. And people will know that they cannot eat, so they will not have children because it's a responsibility, more or less. Some of the theories that they've had that sort of illustrated this were things like the tsunami, where you don't have this amount of food to eat, for instance. And so this is Malthus. He's an Englishman, so he's got these fantastic sideburns. Right, but this is the idea in Malthusian theory, is that the food supply will go to a certain point in growth and population grows exponentially. So rather than having a straight line, it's going to outstrip that amount of food that's actually required to feed these people and will result in people dying of starvation. Now, currently, we have people who are still supporters of this idea as far as how population will be reflected. Current followers of this are called Neo-Malthusians because of Thomas Malthus. And so we've got some ideas that are kind of added to this because it looked like it really wasn't coming true necessarily, and so the main complaints are going to be sort of addressed in this response. And so first of all, you have the idea that not only is it just food, but it could in fact be different resources that would actually be what caused the end of the population growth. And so because of this, people speculated that there would still be an idea that some resource would be the defining factor, and those are the Neo-Malthusians. Now, in poor countries, resources gap has become even wider than it is in more developed countries. So you have places that just can't find any fuel in the past, or you have places that are addressing the fact that you can't get gasoline by most people employing the use of something that doesn't burn a lot of gas, like we see these folks with the tiny scooters, which are really common in Southeast Asia where it's difficult to get resources. So our friend Thanos, basically, the idea that the resources are finite, and if the population just continues to grow, you will run out, and everyone will die and will suffer. Thanos is a Malthusian, as in Thomas Malthusius, Malthanos, rather. That's what we have going on here. So critics of this actually point out that there's a bunch of problems with this theory. First of all, this really is going to assume that resources are a fixed thing instead of something that actually be expanded, and they feel like that's pretty pessimistic. It's not very thoughtful. It's really kind of a dismal outlook. And that a larger population means you're going to have more economic growth. And since you have more economic growth, more people are going to come up with ideas on how to improve things. And so, in reality, Malthus's ideas have pretty much sort of been proven wrong to some degree. So since 1950, one of the big things we have is this thing called the Green Revolution. And so the food supply has steadily increased at a rate that is well ahead of the natural increase rate in countries, meaning the population growth rate. Food production is going to have increased because of these better seeds, land cultivation methods, and growing methods. People in this world don't have access to food, and what that is, honestly, it's speculated it's a problem of wealth distribution. Some people just don't have the money in their population to get food. It's not that they're starving because they can't produce it. It's because other countries are going to basically have more of a demand for this, and they have the wealth to buy these things. And so Malthus' predictions kind of have proven to be inaccurate as far as population growth goes also. Some places are having like a negative population, as Japan is, and we've talked about that a bit in class. If you haven't been in class yet, you will hear this when you get here. But Japan's population is going to actually be predicted decreasing from 127 million in 2010 to about 95 million in 2050, which is quite a drop. They have a very large group of older people and not as many young people, and people are not having children at the rate that they have, which means that the rate of population growth is negative. All right. One of the bigger critics to Malthus is Esther Boserup. And Esther Boserup is going to say that agriculture is going to actually be the defining factor here because people intensified the way that they produce food. And so population change means that the people who are growing food have to figure out how to keep up with it. And what the idea is that there's always some sort of resource. And so these people are called cornucopians. Like at Thanksgiving, they got the cornucopia. It's that big horn that's got all the food coming out of it. And it's the idea that continued progress and creation of material items can be met because of advances in technology. We will make advances that are going to make things better. We'll 3D print food or something like that, I guess. So here is Boserup. And the second thing we deal with today is population policies. And so these are things that the government is going to do to try to encourage or discourage population growth. All right, so first of all, what we have to deal with is this idea of a dependency ratio. So in a civilization, or a country rather, you have a number of people who are dependent on a second group to work through these things. So dependents are people that are either too young or too old to work. So generally about 15 or below, and over 65 in most developed countries is kind of what we're talking about. There are exceptions, obviously, when we get into countries where child labor is more acceptable or where people have to keep working to maintain the idea of staying stable. Right? Now, too many young people causes a financial strain on the population because you need to have more people in school, meaning you need more people teaching, you need more medical, you need more daycare, all these things that come to be necessary with a young population. Conversely, a very old population also has different strains because you have to have pensions for these people, you need increasing reasons for medical care because of the fact of illness being something that's going to be a constant battle. The second thing we deal with is the idea of a gender or sex ratio. The sex ratio is the number of males per 100 females in a population. And generally speaking, we find that the male to female population ratios are going to be where women are going to be more prevalent because they live longer. There tend to be more women in a given civilization, or given city rather. Generally, women live about 7 years longer than men in most developed countries. So more females than men is pretty common when you get to the very higher stages at the very least. There are areas where you've got more women than men, and you have areas where you have more men than women. The ones that certainly have a lot more men than women, and we discussed this a bit in class, like China and India, cause you to have some questions about why that's happening, and a lot of times it's going to be either a policy or cultural value. So, what we start to look at in India, for instance, we've got some population planning. First of all, family planning, the use of contraceptives and abortions and sterilization have all become really unpopular. And we say sterilization, that is where someone is rendered unable to have children. India's population is going to take over China. It's speculated by about 2030. In the future, China also has some population policies. Now, where India is trying to discourage the use of these things, China kind of went in a different direction. And we talked a little bit in class about this. The one-child policy that's put out in 1980 is supposed to lower the crude birth rate. They wanted people to have less babies. And so people received a cash benefit for having only one child in the sense that you had to pay more taxes if you had more than one child. China's government also offered free contraceptives, that's things like condoms or birth control pills, abortions, and again, sterilization, people being given a medical procedure to prevent them from being able to have kids. Today, China's current total fertility rate is 1.5. What that means is the number of babies a woman is expected to have in her life is about 1.5 currently. So it is working as they wanted it to. And so we have these things on the side, and we've got translations beneath them. But currently, the sex ratio at birth is a little different, and there's 118 males born for every 100 females, which seems a little high. There's some videos here. If you'd like to watch them, feel free. But what we're really looking at is the decrease in birth rate, and why it's happened. So communities basically spend money on education and healthcare. Generally speaking, what that does is it's going to lower the crude birth rate. First of all, women who learn job skills are going to want to be part of the workforce because it is economically makes them more powerful. Second, they learn that they do not have to have children. And when we talk about the idea of healthcare impacting this, if more infants are going to survive and more kids are going to live through childhood, women will have fewer children because the total number of children that they're trying to raise, basically. And so the crude birth rate, if child mortality is high, often countries like that you'll have where there will have more children because the children are dying. And so if you're trying to have kids, you're going to have to sort of keep trying. All right? So, birth rates generally have declined through things like contraceptive methods that have been put all over the place. There are generally accepted as contraceptive uses goes up, you will see an immediate drop in crude birth rate. So, the number of babies being born goes down because more people are either going to be using or at least going to have an understanding of the use of birth control methods. And so this is really helpful in lowering crude birth rate in developing countries. And so we've got some programs here. We've got posters in New York City, posters in Japan. Also, we have other posters that sometimes are a little different. So how would you be more careful if it was you that got pregnant, showing some gentlemen being afflicted by the pregnancy? All right, so we have two kinds of policies. You have pro-natalist and anti-natalist. So a natalist policy is about birth control. Pro-natalists are encouraging births to expand the population. So pro-natalist policy is where the government is trying to make people have more kids or encouraging people to have more kids. Anti-natalists are trying to restrict people having children and shrink the population. And so, some natalist posters we have here. The Chinese one-child policy, what we're dealing with, is something that started out in the 70s, and what you had was really a concern that in the past, China had really had a problem feeding itself for a number of years. We had a lot of people die of famine, and so the skyrocketing population made people nervous because they weren't sure they would be able to feed a larger population. So generally, it's not really enforced that strongly anymore. But what we look at is in rural areas now, it's not as well enforced, but urban city areas, if you have more than one child, you generally are going to have a tax problem. If you are in rural areas, you can have 2 children before you have taxation problems. But they do encourage people to sort of wait and get married and have children later in life and to space the children out further. Generally, there's a strict enforcement in the use of things like mandatory abortions and financial penalties, and single-child couples are also going to sort of get this tax incentive, a cash bonus more or less, that allows them to be more successful. So generally, it's worked. Fertility rates have kind of fallen for average women, so it's basically below about two kids per child, as we talked about earlier. They also have these ad campaigns promoting the idea of one child being sort of the prosperous family, and additionally, there's this particular ad we have here. It's kind of subtly pointing out that girl children are also very exciting, that you should be happy. You shouldn't try to worry about this problem, because there had been a variety of accusations in the past about people having infanticide against female children. Now, India is going to also experience a tremendous population growth, and one of the big things that they see there that is going to be a cause for this is often female babies are not necessarily going to experience the same problems as in China in the sense of infanticide, but male children are thought of a little higher culturally, and so people would keep trying to have a child until they had a male child. And so this favoritism for boys is like a traditional cultural thing more than a state-sponsored thing. So modern campaigns came along trying to restrict this, and initially birth control was introduced, and to a point that actually mandatory sterilizations, people being forced to have sterilizations, are going to be performed. And they actually rewarded doctors for the number of medical operations they did to render a woman unable to have child. And so these are sort of getting people culturally to be afraid of this and thinking that birth control is pretty negative. If we move to Africa, we have Kenya as a sub-Saharan African country that had really, really fast population growth starting in the late 60s. And so as the size goes up, people were concerned, people are unable to feed the population, people were nervous. And so they start putting these policies out. Additionally, there are some epidemics that started to come up. And so the AIDS epidemic that went through Africa of the late 70s and early 80s, as well as the narrow workforce and the amount of people to have jobs, are going to be used like in this poster here, where you say jobs are scarce, have few children, where people are starting to find other ways. All right, so this is another poster from Kenya where it says, I stopped using family planning because my friends told me it is not good for my health. And then you have the nurse saying, that is not true. The methods we recommend for you are safe. Family planning methods are safe, is what it says at the bottom. And so you're trying to get people to have the knowledge in society, basically, so that we can start to reduce the population through responsible methods. Now, Denmark, on the opposite side, their population was starting to go downward. And so we have these posters here. Do it for mom. Your mother would love to have a grandchild. Denmark, make more babies. Urging couples to take time to say yes. And then in small print it says, to marriage, having your first child and your second child. And then we have Russia, where large families are being glorified in this. This is like some World War II era propaganda. But now we still have this same idea carrying on, where 3 children are born every minute in Russia. The country needs you to set records. So they're trying to get people to have children. And so that is the material that you'll basically need between these. Mostly the Malthusian information is going to be necessary for you to complete the article and answer that little essay so that we can get that done when we get in class. So I look forward to seeing you in class this week, and if I've already seen you, we shall see you again next week. And so without further ado, have a great day.